In this lesson, we're going to take a step back from the coding details of the introductory web app and look at the big picture. Let me begin with jargon. I've described the introductory example as a web app rather than as a website, although either term might be used. There's lots of jargon, of course, surrounding the web. There are web apps, web services, websites, web portals, and so on, and things can get a bit confusing. I'm not trying to standardize the terminology here, but let me make a couple of points about why web app seems a good term for our purposes. The app part of web app suggests, of course, that code is in play, so that the pages we're dealing with are, for the most part, dynamically generated. In other words, generated by code. We're not dealing simply with static HTML pages. In the first example, we did have a mix. Input.html is a static page, and convert.jsp, the JSP script, generates an HTML page. So you've got both in play. Now, in this working file, it's called sites services apps.txt. We're looking at it as usual in my Emacs editor. I have a lot of bullet points that goes over web apps, websites, web services. But instead of going through those bullet points one at a time, they're really for summary purposes. Let me come down to the middle to this depiction, which indicates how complicated things have become in the web world. And it also reinforces, I hope, the idea that web app is a good term to cover the sorts of things that we're going to be covering. So as you can see, in this crudely defined architecture, what I have in the middle is a web browser. And to the left and right of the web browser are two distinct web servers. They might be the same, but for emphasis, let's suppose that they are completely different physical devices. They're different hosts in networking jargon. I've also labeled the requests and the responses for ease of reference. So let's walk through very quickly what's going on here. The web browser, presumably with a human there using it, issues a request against the web server on the left for an HTML document, and that comes back. That's the response down below. Let's assume that this HTML page has some embedded JavaScript. We haven't seen that yet, but we will fairly shortly. Once the browser has the page displayed in place, the JavaScript can execute, and it sends out request labeled 3 over there to the right to another web server. And that web server delivers up a JSON document, JavaScript object notation. No doubt you've seen some of that. And a JSON document is simply the text representation of a native JavaScript object. In this scenario, then, what you have is the JavaScript in an embedded HTML page acting as a web service client. That would be the traditional description about what's going on the right-hand side. The entire thing can be described as one big web app. So there's a traditional website in play on the left, but there's also a web service in play on the right. So the way I would like to characterize everything that's going on here is as a web app. When precision is absolutely necessary, I may emphasize the website aspect of a certain web app or the web service aspect of a certain web app. But in general, my practice is going to be to use web app to cover the sorts of coding applications that we're going to be covering in these movies. So I hope this overview is helpful. It will become fleshed out and refined as we get into more elaborate examples, particularly examples that involve embedded JavaScript.